Is this it, really?
I guess.
I could've skipped too.
All right, it's 6 o'clock on Wednesday, June 26th. This is the City of Brainerd City Council Capital Budget Workshop. Tony, please call the roll.
There's nobody here.
Johnson?
Here.
Chezak?
O'Day?
O'Day? Stunek?
Here.
Terry?
Here.
Stengline?
Here.
Bevins?
Here
Bidup?
is absent. Item number 3 is discussion items. 3A is the 2025 capital planning. You want me to turn it to you or to Connie? Connie.
Okay, so Jesse's gonna start with talking about the parks facility planning that they did and where they're at.
Thank you, Mr. President, Council. So the first handful of sheets here, I apologize, it's a little hard to read, but it's just more of an illustration, and you can go through it in a little bit more detail. This is kind of a culmination of a couple-year process that the park board has kind of entailed of trying to gather information on the parks, as well as try to organize and kind of get themselves into a capital plan and organize themselves in that way. We've had a couple of different joint workshops to kind of get an idea of how they want to do capital planning in general. The first 3 sheets are a collection of what that plan looks like. Yep. So they have a handful of which parks, what they would like to do, what year they're planning to do those things, and then the replacement cost. What I'll note in here, it is not a complete final product. Some things that they do need to still continue to evaluate. One thing that they discussed at this meeting yesterday, we are going to do I'll call it a field trip on the July meeting, at the start of the July meeting, to evaluate Mills Field and take a look at the facility there and really have a discussion as a board of what they'd like to see for the long-term future of Mills Field. There's a lot of very large expenditures that would come as replacement costs for a lot of those pieces at Mills Field, and what does that look like? But also, a lot of these items, while you'll see the replacement cost in this plan, not everything when it comes due would necessarily be a replacement. Some of these things, when it comes due, let's say in 5 years, maybe it is more of a rehab rather than a full-on replacement. So I just wanted to highlight those pieces. With that, through that work, they did highlight a 30-year capital request. And this is kind of, again, a culmination of the discussions with council, as well as how do they start working a way to build a fund that they can long-term fund capital replacement and rehab of the different facilities that they have. So using that 2% per year thought process, and then requesting funds from the council from that fund each year to start funding some of these projects. So in that 4th page, you'll see that 2% per year through the next 30 years, as well as catch up. There's a handful of different projects that they're identifying that
What's the,
the catch-up funding, yep. The catch-up funding is a handful of projects that are coming up in the next handful of years that we just won't have enough essentially stored within that 2% per year by the time. So they're identifying these dollars as we need to start saving a little bit more for these projects when that comes around. And then the immediate funding was a project that kind of came up a little bit quicker. It's actually at Buffalo Hills Park. It's a gravel parking lot that we need to reconfigure. It's actually coupled with a playground replacement project. Kind of came up as part of the playground replacement project. So you can kind of see here, they've really identified really what they're looking at for the next 30 years of capital facility requests for the council. Now, these are going to be requests, and like I said, it's not a final product, but this is their first identification at it. Down the road, I'm sure this will continue to change as they look 5 years at a time. With that, I guess if there's any other questions on park specific, but otherwise I'll turn it over to Connie to kind of talk a little bit more about parks, but also.
I have a park one.
Yeah.
Oh, go. Tiffany has it. Let's do Tiffany first.
I think mine's probably pretty quick, because as I'm looking at this, I'm not seeing anything coming up a second time. So like some things that only last 10 or 15 years should be on here twice, yeah?
So the goal of that 2% fund is that everything is going to eventually be funded out of that 2%. So through that 2%, they want to find a level number that they just request every single year from here on in, and that funds replacement of everything, either whether it's every 15 or 20 years, or every 30 years, or every 50 years, that they don't have, there shouldn't be any surprises that come up, like memorial lights, all of a sudden. That money's been stored ahead of time, and we are ready to go for whatever that does come up. But to your point, correct, this is not a finished product. So
it's a known-
there might be a couple pieces like that, to the mention about the Buffalo Hills Playground. We might have to take a look at this really quick and make sure that there's no little hiccups to do this project, we might have to do a different project ahead of it. There might be a hiccup here and there. So there might be a little bit of massaging in here. I don't think that there's anything grandiose that would drastically change this plan, other than the Mills Field stuff that they're going to discuss next month.
Go ahead, Karen.
This is really good work. Thank you for leading the charge on this. The only other piece is, are there regular grants that we can count on to fund things like this as well?
Not typically for replacement stuff.
Okay.
Most of the, like, DNR has a lot of different grants. Most of it is like expansion and new facilities. That's usually what I see. Sometimes there's trail projects, so some of the resurfacing, so you'll see in here like Boom Lake has a resurfacing. We might be able to tap into that fund. That becomes a little bit more competitive. That's a little tougher to get into, because obviously there's a lot of different trails that do need resurfacing throughout the state. So that one's a little bit more competitive. But there are some, but most of them are towards new facilities.
I just want to, 2025, next year, we have 40 grand for the gravel grading on parking lot in Buffalo Hills. But we've budgeted 559, the 2% plus 205,000 catch-up, and the 40,000 for the gravel. Where does the other 515,000 go? Just into a spend it later fund?
Correct. Yep, so that's
Okay.
identifying those future 2027, 2029, 2030 projects to be funded with that money.
Okay, and then it seems like we've kind of been doing about 450. Like, I can't remember the exact number, but you,
349,000 for.
how much?
349,000 for 2020, four.
Okay, and I presume we'll talk about next where the other 200 and some thousand dollars comes from, since we're only budgeting what Connie.
We really weren't, 2024 was the first year that we did that. They weren't finished with their capital planning, so,
I understand that. I'm speaking more from a perspective of levy.
yes. So,
Okay.
yep,
They get to decide, here's what we're giving you, they get to decide.
right.
I just wanna make that clear, cause it seems like, at least with the parks, we can repeat that time and time again, but it doesn't seem to fit. It doesn't seem to sink in. And I mean, we could do more, we can always raise the levy, but that gets awful expensive on the taxpayers. Gabe?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, that set aside for the park isn't set aside for the park board to spend. It's set aside in the city of Brainerd's capital improvement plan, and when they bring projects to us, we have that money that's set aside that we hope is for the parks, but if we have a catastrophic pay study or something come through that costs us $1 million, that money might be spent elsewhere and not on capital. It's not in the park board's pocket right now.
Got it.
And last year, the park board's facility and equipment request was $747,500. Their request for 2025 total equipment and facilities is $750,000. So really, they stayed within their budget of what was given in 2024. Does that make sense?
That's not the
Right.
budget going forward. They had that in 2024 because we had the capacity to give parks that. Parks asks for so much and has so much backlog of stuff that needs to be done that they're just kind of the catch-all of what isn't spent by other departments.
Correct.
Right, so it's not a guarantee that if they get $750 this year, that's a promise they will get for the rest of time.
Correct. So Lori, can you pull up the 2025, 2029 budget detail comparison by department? Yeah, so if you go down to the bottom of that page. So there is the park, the 750,000, you can kind of see the request. Based on the plan that they did, that's kind of their request for the next 5 years that they're requesting. Like I said, it doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen.
Wanna know a secret?
But what we kind of did there is, you can.
Where's that one?
It's
on
in
the-
the stapled. It's the stapled one. Yep.
Oh, you just have your, yeah,
Yep.
I'm waiting down.
So, this goes through the detail like we normally do, and you can see that the park long-term planning capital maintenance request is only 519,000. So that's what they're saving. They're requesting 559,000 for facilities, but they're spending that 40,000 of it on the Buffalo Hills parking lot.
And 85,000 on a snow blower.
And what?
Oh, just on facilities?
Right. Then they have the equipment, the vehicles, other equipment and like their normal maintenance stuff.
I don't have any Steve. Oh, yeah, they're
Yeah, Parks baseline request this year of what the projects they actually want to do is absolutely feasible.
Lori, can you also pull up the next, Excel spreadsheet and go to, Parks Facilities tab? I didn't make a copy of this sheet, but this is taking their request each year and then putting in this spreadsheet by year. And it is fundable. Obviously, it's very fundable for the Parks Department of what they're requesting.
For the first few years, and that's put into this sheet?
And then that goes into this sheet, the summary sheet.
Yeah.
So again, we get really low in 2027
As a city.
as a city, as a whole. You know, and kind of going across. We get low again in 2035. So just, but you can kind of see that the park, the money set aside for the parks keeps growing. But yet they do use some of it in 2029, again in 2030, again in 2031. And again, like Jesse said, it's still kind of like, that still needs to be worked out, the detail of what projects actually occur in which year. But this is a plan at this point.
Right, and if some sports become entirely unpopular and people stop playing baseball, we'll just take down the baseball fields. If softball becomes entirely too expensive for us to run, we won't replace the lights, right? So there's things that are variables in here.
There's a ton of variables. And I also think that their request has a inflation increase in there too, so that's also making it where the expenses don't. So it kind of is skewed there a little bit too.
Okay.
So we kind of jumped right into the second items, was just the city overall equipment and facility plan. Again, you have the detail by department.
Question on the library, Connie.
Yes.
Do they have the money to spend that 426,000?
I would say that the library, this is the building, and so it's owned by the city.
That's what our 155 goes to each year?
Yes, as well as the operation of the library. The 155 barely, or the library levy barely covers the normal annual maintenance costs of the library.
So when did we authorize this study?
Well, the study was part of the study that was done for all city buildings that we had with Seth do in 2019 or 2020, 2018, around there. That's what the 426,000 is reflecting.
And the library is not responsible for the library, we are.
We are responsible for the library building, yes. I think we can work with them, maybe they can get some more funds from Kichigami. You know, and I haven't gone into the detail of what the exterior mechanical is. I know that they're replacing the air conditioner this year, so that could go down as well.
Is that the money you requested from Kitchi already?
Yeah, we already have that. They're finishing the AC up, I think, tomorrow.
So I'm assuming some of that is also included in there, and that number is gonna go down as well.
I do know they're gonna be asking for a 2%.
They are. Because the operating levy barely pays for the insurance, the, heating and cooling bills. They barely put hardly anything aside for capital.
If I were them, I would put some aside for capital. Okay, sorry, that was just a big number that jumped out on me. Keep going.
So this is the detail. I apologize for not getting it out earlier, but if you have any questions, ask about it later. The other thing to note is that the Fire Station 1, the remodel addition engineering, $50,000, but you see the stars there. That's what's highlighted in green, is that we've been putting the amount of the rent that we get from the Fire Advisory Board calculation. And so that's down on the bottom, and I reduced that by it only goes up by 15,000, which is the difference between the engineering request and the dedication of the fire building.
Okay, so I've heard rumors over the years that we're looking at building a big brand-new fire station in Baxter. Are we now pivoting and gonna just add on to our Fire Station 1, or what's the?
The facility study is not complete yet, or what do I want to say, feasibility?
So we did that, in the budget this year was the location and facilities study. That's not 100% done yet, but, so just going through this process, my feeling, the feeling that I got was that a brand new building is probably not financially feasible. And I think if we, make some renovations and remodel to the existing station, it's not 100% fixing all the problems that we have there, but I think we can get to 80 to 90% and cover it there. It's an old building, right, and there's a lot of things that need to be done there to make it a more usable, more modern space for the fire department. But I think financially, I think it's probably a better option for us as a city than to try to build a whole new, brand new facility, which I'm guessing is not financially feasible at this point.
I'd like to hear that. And that could set the department up to be fine for 20 years?
Yeah, that would be my hope, my hope would be to work with a firm to develop a plan that makes that facility more useful, add some office space, add some apparatus space, attempt to modernize the storage of equipment so it's not on the apparatus floor with the exhaust of the trucks and things like that, to just make it safer in the long term for our fire department and our firefighters. And then if we can, try to start working with our other partners on maybe a third station to the west or the northwest somewhere. Work with those partnerships that we've established through the fire advisory group and kind of try to start working that angle. Because I think ultimately having a third station will serve the city of Brainerd better, as well as the rest of the communities that we serve, based on the time it takes firefighters to get to the fire station and then get an apparatus in route. So that's kind of my thought. That's my vision of where we should probably go, or maybe can afford to go.
Okay, I like that.
And this long-term plan does not include any of those costs associated with modernizing the fire station either. No, it's just right now, we have no idea. So that is not in there. So if we look at 2027, that could be even more, but I think looking around, working together, figuring out, shifting things, I would like to see the levy stay at the $1.2 million.
Given what's gonna happen with personnel costs,
I
I
have no idea.
agree
So
with you. I have an idea.
I do too, but I don't know, so. But yes, I mean, that would, in a perfect world, that's where it's like, it's a plan, but yet 2025 is probably the only thing that we know of at this point.
Okay, yeah, and for the fire, since we have that rent money that comes in, that's set aside, it's $175,000 a year, so that could help us in, with a bond issuance or so.
It's actually the $65,000 a year.
But it would still help us, because it is money that comes in.
So that is all I have on the overall citywide, equipment and facilities. Like I said, if you take it home, digest, have questions, please let me know. And now Jesse will talk about the 10-year street capital plan. That's the huge colorful pieces of paper.
Try to organize it to make it easy to digest. So drafted this up. This is a result of going through this with both engineering staff, BPU staff, kind of going through it and feeling good about kind of the direction that we're headed, doing a lot of updates from last year's, kind of updating it to new projects that we have coming up, like the roundabout, 210, updates that we know with 210. We've gotten some preliminary estimates anyway with that, knowing that we have that $25 million grant that we're gonna see a share of. So doing a few updates with that. Another thing that you'll see is some savings of $35,000 each year for crack sealing that we no longer have to do because we purchased the crack sealing equipment that our maintenance crew is going to help us do crack sealing each year. So we're just going to be purchasing the material each year, and our maintenance crew is going to perform that just because of the crazy amount of increases we've seen year over year. We thought it was a much more advantageous piece to just buy that equipment for a few $1,000s and have our crews handle that instead of paying the $35,000 each year through a contractor. So you'll see that dropped off, so you don't have that each year. Generally, most of this has stayed mostly the same. Again, some updates. With the grant for 210, we did make one change. South 10th and Wright was a resurfacing project with some realignment of Wright Street coming over to 13th Street. That did change to a reconstruction now that we do have a little bit more state aid funding. This was something that BPU was very strongly in support of. They need to replace a lot of the water main in that area. Their hydrants have been failing for some time, so they really needed us to get that redone. Our sewer is not in great shape. We would like to get the sanitary sewer replaced at the same time as well. Storm sewer is doing okay. It's very big, so because it's a state aid route, it would be prevailing wage. So because it's very large pipe, it'd be very, very expensive for us to replace it. So we're going to try and limit as much replacement as we can. It's actually in generally decent shape, so we're going to try and limit as much replacement on the storm sewer as we can. But that was the big change for 2025, but most of everything else has been kept very much the same. One thing you'll see on the Hawkins Drive resurfacing project, there is a dollar amount in here for the water fund. Talking with BPU, while the water main hasn't exhibited issues, they do want to try and address water services as well as hydrant leads that they are concerned about. Water service lines to homes, again, part of this lead service line issue that they're going to have to start looking into addressing. So they're identifying $100,000 here, or at least I'm estimating $100,000 here. Doesn't really affect the resurfacing portion. We talked with their staff about them taking care of the water portion, but also probably having to take care of a chunk of the gravel above it to make sure that they can get their replacements done as part of that. So that kind of pops in there as part of that resurfacing project, because ultimately most of that is in decent shape. Again, the water main's in decent shape, the curb is in decent shape. We didn't want to turn that into a full reconstruction, but this does allow them to still get some of those needs accomplished. I did update the 210 project a little bit. What you'll see in the state aid is mostly related to a lot of the aesthetics. Most likely those are not going to be eligible for the grant that was received on there. So things like the colored concrete, some of the decorative railing, a lot of those things are not going to be necessarily grant eligible. So those are things that we need to address. The water fund, the $2.5 million each year, that estimate went up quite a bit, up to about $5 million in water main replacement, originally, when we first scoped the project, we kind of estimated what it would cost to replace the system existing. Looking at it a lot more closely as what the scope of that project would be, we've identified a much better improvement for that whole area, as well as what that improvement is going to do for us as a city. So that's why you see that changed quite drastically. Trying to see if there's anything else really.
Just gonna ask a quick question about the 210 project.
Yes.
So you have, like, there's no cost in the construction fund, so you said the colored concrete, et cetera, is not grant eligible, but it is state aid eligible?
Should be stated eligible.
Thank you
Yep.
for the clarification.
And I believe lighting is also stated eligible.
But that's in addition to the 2.5 that, oh no, the lighting
It
is.
should be included in the 2.5, because MnDOT will have a share of the 2.5.
Okay.
So the 2.5 should cover aesthetics as well as a chunk of the lighting. We're still working through that process of MnDOT of what's going to be acceptable to them on that corridor. We're working with them on that part of it. One thing I will note is the Oak Street Highway 18, Highway 25 roundabout project in 2033. This one, I left it in the capital plan for now as kind of a placeholder. MnDOT 2 years ago had completed an ICE report that they were kind of identifying an early 2030s project to potentially convert that into a roundabout. And that's kind of about when they were thinking that that might possibly happen. So we thought we'd identify some dollars early in our planning just to make sure that it was there. Now it's possible they might be looking at a late 2020s project to just resurface and possibly replace the lighting, the street lighting. I haven't got any confirmation at all on that yet, so I haven't felt comfortable with making a change there. So I'm leaving it as it is, but that might change once I get some more clarification on MnDOT and what they'd like to do with that intersection. With that, I don't have anything else to add with the 10-year. The next two sheets is something that I've been starting to tackle. If you've heard what I've talked a little bit about with state aid, we have been in an advanced status for a handful of years, which means we've been less than what we've been allocated, so we've been borrowing against future allocations from our state aid partners. And what I've been trying to do is come up with some plans of how are we going to get ourselves out of that advanced status while still being able to address some of our state aid needs on state aid routes, not only the 210 project coming up, the roundabout project that we have a grant that's coming up next year. We've got Beach, that is a state aid route, Wright and 10th that are state aid routes. So we have a handful of different projects that are all state aid routes that need to be addressed. How do we still do those while we're in an advanced status? So I put together this tool to try and plan that out as well, and I found this to be a very helpful tool, not only from a staff perspective, but this also indicates to state aid that, you know, we have a handle of this, and we understand what we're doing of trying to get a grasp of the state aid balance. But what I really like to highlight here is there's two sheets here. So the first sheet is kind of what we've typically done is we've just taken chunks out of that state aid balance and advanced it. So when a $2 million project comes, we just advance the $2 million and we go $2 million further in the hole. And that's worked generally until they stop giving it to you, and then we have to use our local dollars to do stuff, and then hopefully, you know, in the future they'll reimburse you, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
We still have to cash flow the project.
Still have to cash flow the project if you're going to do the project. The second option there is, and I've used this before in a different community over in Marshall, is state aid bonding. It's a mechanism that you can do is bonding for the project, and what you use is your allocations to pay back the principal and interest, both your construction and maintenance allocations. And they are just, from the state aid side, they pay those back. Using maybe like $1 million as the trigger to that's the size of project that you bond, that can stretch out some of those projects out over a longer term of time. The reason I'm showing you this is I also did get notification as of Monday that we were granted our first award for the pedestrian bridge.
It was exciting. It was a good meeting.
Are you serious?
So we were.
Yeah.
That was
So
already
one, 1.3 million. So I'm gonna tell you, 1.3 million is a far short cry of the 5 million of construction that is estimated for that bridge. Now, the DNR supports that project, and I think we could potentially get some help from them. I don't know what that would look like, and there's no guarantees or anything like that. But it's something that, this gives us some momentum, and I think that we can leverage that to hopefully get something else. But to use that 1.3 and start moving, the only way to really, if you look at the first sheet, that with that lump sum grabbing money, in 20, so we have to award a project by the end of next year to use those funds. That was kind of the terms of it. Now, if we don't do it, we turn the funds back over. It's gonna be a challenge for us as staff to turn a project over in that amount of time, which it's a very important project. As a staff, we'll make it happen. If the council wants to make a project happen, we'll make it happen. But the challenge is gonna be finding the other available funding. The other part of it is, you can't cash flow it by taking lump sums. Even if we find another $2 million fund from the DNR, we still need to come up with $3 million. Whether if it's all state aid money, we can't cash flow it all in one lump sum. But if you look at the bonding side of it, if you take the $3 million and bond it, you could spread that $3 million over time. Now, in the next 10 years, that doesn't get you out of advanced status, but you're not to the point where you can't borrow. There's a certain limit that you can't be too far negative by statute. So you can potentially get there. There's no guarantee, and there's some massaging that we would have to do with this, but that's the only way that I can see that we can make this work with having a pedestrian bridge project, is by bonding some of these larger 210 projects, a pedestrian bridge project, the Wright and 10th projects, some of these big chunk projects. That's the only way I can see it. But I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned this to you as a council, and seeing if this is something that council would support as direction for staff when it comes to these larger, big state aid projects, at least until we get into a better spot with our state aid balance. Let's look at some of these larger projects and do some state aid bonding, stretch that out until we can get into a better spot. And then we can start taking out larger sums. But if we want to do something like a pedestrian bridge in the short term, that might be the only option that we have. Now, we'll introduce this more formally at a council meeting about that grant, and we'll start putting out our feelers about what we can find for other alternative funding to kind of supplement the grant that we were awarded. And I don't know what the other alternatives would be. I don't know if there's going to be an appetite for local levy dollars towards it too, but I do know that state aid money is eligible, but I don't know how much I can put towards this project before I'm capped out with my state aid. But beyond that, like I said, between this has been one of my biggest goals, is trying to couple both the 10-year capital plan with state aid projections and making them all kind of talk to each other, make sure that we have a solid plan, that we're not trying to overtake too much. I'm trying to do more between these as well as our utility rates as well. So that's a goal of mine as well. Questions?
The pedestrian bridge was about 6 million.
It's a 4.5 to 5 construction. Then you have engineering, preliminary engineering, and other stuff. So I'd say potentially upwards of 6.
Yep, okay, just wanted to make sure. Any other questions of Jesse?
No, that's pretty cool.
So the last thing that I had to highlight is this memo here. Connie may have mentioned potential for an alternative way of funding some of our projects here after I went through that 10-year. This is something that I've been exposed to, that a lot of communities have really started getting on board with and moving on to, is franchise fees as an alternative funding source to not only just levy dollars and bonding, but also special assessments. If you're not familiar, the franchise fees is something that a lot of communities levy onto utilities, electric, gas, cable. A lot of different municipalities use it. Over half municipalities actually levy franchise fees on the utilities, and they just typically pass them along to the customers. We even do it on cable, not much, it's $125,000 a year. Half of it's used to broadcaster meetings, the other half supplements the levy. So it's not very much that we use it, but the amount that, through my research, it's all over the place. So you have some that are very little, like us, where it's 125,000, and there's some that are in the millions that they generate through franchise fees. It really depends on what they want to use it for. But this is one of these opportunities that a lot of these places have been trending towards. One of the challenges that we've had with the current construction funding is, like I mentioned, those are the three main ways to fund it is through the permanent improvement levy, issuing debt or bonding, and then special assessments. We can only put up to 9% in the permanent improvement levy. We've typically only done 6% in the last couple of years since the charter change. And then obviously with the special assessment policy, we share that 50-50 with our residents and property owners. What I included in here is something that I thought was very eye-opening, and it's the charts in the back was something that was presented to me at one of our region meetings. And we've talked a little bit about, well, everybody's kind of talked about kind of post-COVID inflation. But I thought this was very telling that construction inflation has really been an issue not far before COVID. I mean, the last 15 years, the inflation on construction has been incredible since 2009 even. And some of these charts really kind of just illustrate that. The numbers are more of a statewide average on state aid roads, but I think the trend is very telling, and even our numbers kind of agree with a lot of that. In going into some of this stuff, I'm not going to read the whole memo, but looking at just the assessment rate on one of our reconstruction projects, so looking at North Brainerd reconstruction versus a North Brainerd reconstruction project, the one in 2009, the assessment rate was $37 and change. And you go to the one that was assessed last year, and it was $76 and change, so nearly double. So that's the kind of, that's what you're seeing in these charts, is that's the kind of inflation that we're seeing in the last 15 years. It's not just the last 3. Now, it's accelerated quite a bit in the last couple of years because of post-COVID and all those different pieces, but it's just not limited to the last few years. And the other challenges are the increases in the levy and issuing of debt. We're just not able to keep up with that level of inflation on construction, and nobody is. And that's why a lot of communities are looking at franchise fees as a potential solution to some of these issues, because you just can't keep up with it reasonably without crazy increasing levy rates to pay for some of this stuff. So that's some of the challenges with it. I did do a little bit of analysis, or in the next section, I put a lot of the different benefits that I found that franchise fees can provide, especially over special assessments. It's very consistent, not only for us as a city for budgeting planning. It's a lot like utility rates. We know how many people there are, how many people are paying those rates. We can plan for it, and when it's time that we need to raise them up, we know what that's going to be, and we can plan that out very well. It's not as jumpy as like a property values or anything like that. So it's very easy for us to plan that. And it's the same thing for a person that's in a residence. For the next 40 years, they know what they're going to be generally paying for a utility rate for the next 40 years, unless we change the rates. They don't necessarily know when a special assessment project is going to come in unless they happen to see it on a 10-year CIP. So that's some of the benefits there too. I also put in here an example of what the difference would be for somebody that moves into a home, lives in a home for 40 years. You would generally expect that somebody should see a special assessment for a reconstruction, and then in roughly 20 years they should see a special assessment for a resurfacing. That pavement won't last for a full year, 40 years. they should see a resurfacing. So you should see 2 special assessments. So looking at just quick off-the-cuff numbers, you should see about $12,500 worth of assessments for those reconstruction projects or resurfacing projects. But in the franchise fee model, using $10 a month, 5 for electric, 5 for gas, that same person with a 100-foot frontage is only paying about $4,800 over that 40-year period. So it's only about, not quite a little over a third of that cost, and that's spread over the whole entire 40 years. So you can see that there's quite a bit of a difference between the two. And then, obviously, with the franchise fee, you also have the added benefit of potentially a lower levy as well if you don't have the permanent improvement levy that also goes with it. So there's some other added benefits that go with it. I did get, oh, yep.
Didn't we look at, and this I think is actually before you got here, we struggled with the franchise fee on electric, since we're the electric supplier. I know Baxter tried to do it, and it, anybody in this room remember what, I don't remember what happened, but, Connie, do you remember?
Baxter could not implement the franchise fee on the
Correct.
electric.
On BPU, they could on their other electrical
Yes,
supplies.
but not BPU.
And why was that again?
Because we were a municipality and so we were different. Somehow we were different.
I don't know.
Remember the details.
Something tells me our greatest amount of revenue would be a franchise fee on electricity, but we weren't able to do that because we're the electrical supplier.
Yeah, we were able to do it on electric, gas, can't do it on water. When I asked Todd Wickland about this, because I know you're talking about the court case with Baxter.
Right.
My understanding of that court case, it was more, my understanding of it was that Baxter was requiring us to implement the franchise fee, and it needs to be an agreement between the municipality and the utility. And it's highlighted in here that it is an agreement between you and the utility. There is no guarantee that they will agree. Most of them do, because they just pass along that. They are also required by part of that agreement that you don't charge them permit fees when they do work within the right of way and other benefits like that. But you are allowed by statute to be able to charge these franchise fees, but it is only on electric and gas. Water is not part of that statute that's allowed, at least right now. Cable is allowed. They've been talking about potentially expanding, I think, on cable, but as far as I understand, electric is allowed. But my understanding of the issue with Baxter was they were kind of dictating that they were going to do it, and it wasn't necessarily an agreement.
We did collect it for a while, for them, but then,
I think part of Baxter's problem is the way they structured it, is that the utility paid it based on number of hookups, regardless of whether they were, the number of meters in the city, regardless if they were hooked up or paying bills or anything. So it was more of a tax on DPU than it was on the ratepayer.
okay.
So my quick conversation with him is that it would be possible for us to do, but obviously more conversations would need to be had. Now, we have not had any conversations with CenterPoint on this either. So really quick, off-the-cuff calculations. So I've collected some information from BPU on how many electric customers that we have, and I put that into this table here really quick to just kind of calculate, just to get rid of, in our quick draft of the 10-year CIP, for the construction fund and the special assessments, to wipe that out and not use city dollars and special assessments to fund our construction program anymore. We need roughly about $2 million per year of franchise fees to offset that funding. So how do you do that with this? So I plugged in some example numbers just to have some sort of an idea of what that would look like. And that's what I put in here. Now, again, I don't have any numbers from CenterPoint, so for quick example, you just take this and double it. Have to get something from CenterPoint of how many customers and which different categories they have for us, and I'm sure we can get that from them if we want to continue down this road of getting more information. But it looks like it would be doable for us under those frameworks if the council wants to move this forward. But based on what I've seen from other communities wanting to move this forward, it's very costly for us to do special assessments, not only from a bonding standpoint. We have the issuance of the bonds, we have bond interest that goes into it, it's very expensive for that. But it's also very expensive for staff. We have a lot of different hearings, different mailings that we have to do. There's thousands of dollars into that, as well as the amount of staff time that goes into preparing assessment rolls, sending all those notices that go out there, and then just the issue of the public perception of implementing a special assessment on somebody's property, especially when you get into some of these lower income neighborhoods. It is really tough on some of those folks that they suddenly have a $8,000-9,000 assessment coming their way, and some of them don't necessarily had seen it coming until the last year beforehand. So this is a way for us to be able to fund that without having to impose a large special assessment all at once or even over 10 years that they didn't necessarily see coming. Like I said, a lot of communities are actually moving this direction to offset the special assessments so that they don't have all of these different barriers that are held up by state statute for special assessments specifically. But
Are you saying we're gonna have a reduction in special assessments if we went the route of this franchise fee, a reduction in special assessments and a reduction in the debt levy?
the way I'm proposing it, I'm proposing that all of the construction fund and special assessments in this 10-year plan would be zero. And it would be
construction
funded
fund.
through the franchise fee.
So the levy that we have for the mill levy, the permanent improvement, the 6%, that we probably could eliminate that.
Yep.
And then we won't also have to bond for it, so it also would reduce the debt levy in the future as well.
So it would over time reduce debt issuances on street projects.
No, I'll mention one thing, that it would be a little bit of a phased approach, because you won't be able to necessarily do 100% switch it over year one, because you do have folks that obviously just paid an assessment last year. What a lot of communities have done that have done this, have done things like rebates for the franchise fees over a certain amount of time. So there's different ways of crafting that, but you do have to do it in a kind of a phased approach. You can't just all of a sudden turn the light switch and switch it over. So there's ways to do that, but it takes a little bit of time to switch over. But eventually, yes, to your point, you do lower
In 10 years.
you do lower your intent of the levy between debt levy, any potential levy towards permanent improvements, as well as the special assessments.
And the 2 million would cover those higher increases and all of the stuff that you laid out. I think the 2 million would be adequate to cover.
So the 2 million covers the average per year as what's in the 10-year CIP right now. Now again, as we do these 10-year CIPs, if we see, our average bid price continues to go up, and that we sit to reflect that in our CIP, and we see steady growth, and we evaluate this and say, you know what, we need to relook at that franchise fee, then we would do, I believe they're done by ordinance, and we send that ordinance over to the utility companies, and then they just change that. I believe we have to do one every year, and then they change the rate based on what's included in the ordinance. Much not different than our storm utility and our sanitary utility. So we just have to do that ordinance every year, and then whatever the rate we set.
My last question. You can go, Dave.
Oh, well, I think I have to think about this some more, because it seems like we're shifting that, that the 2/3 of it is coming from somewhere. Maybe not this homeowner, but that money is coming from somewhere. And I'm not sure that shifting onto the utilities is the way we should be going as opposed to on property owners. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, so the money's not just appearing from somewhere.
Right.
So the residents are still paying for all of that $2 million per year. It's just getting passed through from the utilities into their utility bill. So what's happening is, special assessments specifically, instead of 50 to 70 people specifically paying for a chunk of the project, it's being shared by a larger group. One thing that and you'll get into this if you read this more. Again, some of the benefits here, especially when it gets to things like property taxes. Churches, schools, nonprofits, some of the folks that are property tax exempt aren't paying for some of these facilities like streets that are using it pretty regularly. This helps solve some of that issue, that they are helping fund some of these improvements that they are using. Some of the folks that aren't living on Buffalo Hills Lane, for instance, that are using Buffalo Hills Lane, they're also contributing towards those improvements. So this is, yes, you're having the whole community contribute to all of the street projects, but this is also everybody using some of these street projects too. So it's not just a select group,
Right.
it's everybody sharing in it. Yep.
Go ahead, Gabe.
And maybe it's a Joe question, when we craft an ordinance establishing franchise fees, under the promise of no more assessments and no more,
Say
Permanent improvement
say
levy.
understanding, not promise.
under the understanding, could we craft an ordinance that says these franchise fees exist so long as we aren't doing special assessments or having a
That would be up,
permanent improvement levy?
that would be up to the council to dictate where those funds go to.
So I'd hate to institute a new fee on our residents and then just turn right around and still have all the same taxes in place. It sounds
We
good.
wouldn't do that.
No, I wouldn't. We're done in 2 years, Kelly. Something to consider.
No, there's like I said, a lot of communities have moved from the old way of doing special assessments into this franchise fee model. So there's a ton of different outreach models and the different things that people put out of how they've engaged their residents of what this is and why they've done this. And so there's a lot of different things and resources that we have at our fingertips to use. Same thing with the resolutions and ordinances that we would need to implement this. But to your point about where those funds get allocated, I think that would just be a council piece that you would dictate where those funds are used.
Did you say I'm sorry, did you do any math as far as X amount of Brainerd utilities customers versus raising 2 million? Of what you'd expect to see on a utility bill? Or did you say you hadn't done that math yet?
So that should be on the last page. Not the tables, but the last, like, typed memo page. There's a table here. This is just what BPU has provided me for the different groups of billing customers that they have and the number of customers they have in those groups.
My last page is curb and gutter construction.
Before those drafts.
Correct.
The last black and white page.
So this is a quick sample of me throwing some numbers in there, and these are numbers that are about roughly in line with other communities that have used these franchise fees to offset special assessments.
But you said you're looking for 2 million, so it'd be, everything here would be doubled.
So yeah, like I said, I haven't gotten stuff for Centerpoint, but think of this very much like Centerpoint. Centerpoint is also
God, this is.
framed very
right.
much like that. They
So
have,
residents is gonna see a $10 increase per month, as an example.
correct. Centerpoint Gas has very similar types of.
Yeah, that's right, you get to blame the utilities. What if we put it all on the permanent improvement fund? What if we raised that? It was 9, now it's 6%. What would that have to go up? And that would only be a property owners, not utility payers. So that would be,
So if you move from 6 to 9, that would help for 1 year, but what you run into then, even if we're at 9, is it's based on the levy. So every year that the construction costs go up 8 to 10%, and the levy only goes up 5 to 6.
but that's gonna go up regardless of whether we whether we franchise fee or
Correct.
the cost is gonna go up.
The other part of that is, it's based on property values, so if property values all of a sudden go up for these couple years,
Yeah,
that might change quite a bit, and then if property values go down,
we've seen that in the last 10 years here.
very up and down,
But each
where the
resident's gonna have
franchise
to pay.
fee stays very steady until you change what the rate is going to be. Because unless, obviously you get more customers or less customers, but it generally stays pretty consistent. And that's highlighted in some of this list too, of what the difference is between.
It'd be way easier for me to pay $10 to $15 a month on my utility bill than what my last assessment was. I mean, just from a customer perspective. I'd be interested in this.
With that, and we're sharing the expense with renters, and so everybody would pay, not just the property owner on
Right.
assessments.
Well, that was one other piece of it, like apartment buildings, the renters are paying it because it's on their bill. Whereas you do a special assessment, the building owner is going to pay the special assessment, but odds are they're going to pass that through to the residents anyway through raised rent.
Any other questions? Anything else, Jesse?
No, sir.
Anything else, Connie?
If this is something that the council would like to see more information on, we can do more of a formal presentation once we've gathered more information on. And,
Anybody disagree with that? We can't
Looking
vote.
into.
Yeah, it's worth looking into, Jesse. With those of us that care enough to show up. If there's nothing else, you miss anything?
I
We
make
are
a
adjourned.
motion, we quit.
We quit
That's it.
with 5 minutes to spare, Kevin.